Welcome to this video series on the Making International Law in Korea. We'll begin in this week of videos with a description and explanation of the core principles and practices of international law, and discuss the primary sources of international law in Korea, such as democracy and international human rights law. Let me first touch upon the Korea's entry into human rights treaties. Korea is a party to major international human rights treaties. According to Article 6.1 of the Korean Constitution, adopted in 1987, the treaties signed and promulgated in accordance with the Constitution have the same force as domestic law. While sometimes domestic law do not recognize human rights treaties as the having force, human rights treaties are likely to be invoked directly by domestic courts and to be treated to have domestic legal force. Before the 1990s, Korea has accepted only a few international human rights treaties, including the Convention on the Prevention and Punishments of the Crime of the Genocide of the 1951, the International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination of the 1979, and Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women in 1985. With the development of democracy in Korea since early 1990s, Korea began to accept major international human rights treaties, ratifying the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights and its protocol in 1990, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights in 1990. Since then, Korea became the party to the Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1991, the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatments or punishments in 1995, the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the Involvement of the Children in Armed Conflict in 2004, and the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2009. In 1991, Korea withdrew the reservation attached to Article 24.4 of the ICCPR concerning equality of rights and responsibility between spouses. In 1991, it withdrew the reservation attached to Article 61C, D, F, which in particular stipulate equality between spouses in marriage. Furthermore, it withdrew the reservation attached to Article 14.7 of the CEDAW, concerning the prohibition of the double jeopardy in 1993. In 1999, the Korea withdrew reservation attached to Article 9 of the CEDAW concerning the equality among men and women in maintaining their nationality. It also withdrew its reservation on Article 14.5 of the ICCPR concerning the right to appeal to higher courts if convicted. In 2007, it accepted the optional protocol to CEDAW, which allows an individual communication. However, there are still several human rights treaties that Korea has yet to join. In 2015, the Human Rights Committee, in its concluding observations, recommended Korean government to consider to joining in a second optional protocol to the ICCPR on abolishing the death penalty. Korea has not yet accepted the International Convention on the Protection of Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families, and the International Convention for the Protection of all persons from enforced disappearance. Let me touch upon the human rights protection in Korea based on domestic procedure and institutions. Generally speaking, in any country, a court expected to be a key player in protecting and promoting the human rights. When it comes to Korean courts, however, there have been collaborated human rights violations in the past. Before the 1990s, courts were mostly under complete control of the military regime, which has ruled the country since early 1960s. Many civilians, including students, fishermen, Korean Japanese who came to Korea to study, were tortured and made as North Korean spies and sympathizers. For example, in 1974, the Supreme Court confirmed the death sentence to 8 civilians given by a military tribunal who were falsely accused of having attempted, based on communism, to topple the government. They were all ejected very next day. In 2006, after 3 decades of the ejection, they were found not guilty by a retrial. In a criminal investigation process, torture have been committed widely, and the victims' allegations of torture has been ignored by the judges. For example, Kim Dae-jung, who had been sentenced to death in 1981 by the Supreme Court, became the president in 1998, and under his presidency and continuing into the next administration under the Roh Moo-hyun, Korea has made notable progress in protecting human rights. Firstly, the Human Rights Commission established in 2001 contributed to the embodiment of human dignity and worth. For example, the Commission recommended the abolition of capital punishment to the government, as well as allowing consensus objection and introducing an alternative service to military duties. The second, the Constitutional Court, which was established in 1988, has increasingly been contributed to the protection of human rights. In 2013, the court held that the emergency measures proclaimed in the 1970s were unconstitutional because they violated, in particular, the right of expression and the right of liberty, paving the way, allowing remedies to victims of human rights violations. The court has rendered several rulings protecting human rights. The third, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, established in 2005, has investigated past human rights violations cases which previously may have been impossible due to the lapse of time. The Commission investigated over 10,000 cases and encouraged the government to apologize to the victims to restore their honor, as well as to take appropriate measures accordingly. The Commission's report was critical in nullifying guilty the verdicts under the military regime, typically obtained through the torture, and allowing the victim compensation from government through civil litigations. Several special commissions were created to investigate deaths in the military and massive civilian killings by the Korean Army that had happened in Jeju Island in late 1940s. The fourth, the human rights NGOs have played a critical role in raising human rights issues in and around Korea. The NGOs, including human rights NGOs, organized civil society in 1987 to oust the military regime and to impeach the corrupt president in 2017. Human rights NGOs actively campaigned to establish truth commissions too. Human rights development in Korea owes much to many NGOs indeed.